Why did you take another offer? The billionaire CEO asked the single mom she met in the elevator. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin today's touching story about two women whose lives become forever connected through one unexpected meeting, I would like to ask one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one of our new stories. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue creating heartfelt, emotional, and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, hope, and love between women. Every subscription truly inspires us to keep sharing meaningful stories with audiences around the world. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from today by leaving your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and the unexpected moment that quietly changed the direction of her life forever. Sometimes the smallest decision changes your entire future, not because it feels extraordinary in the moment, but because you do not yet know who is standing beside you. I thought about those words many times afterward, but on that crisp Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, they were the last thing on my mind. My name is Grace Sullivan. I was 34 years old, a marketing strategist, a single mother, and someone who had learned that life rarely rewards perfect plans. Every important choice I made eventually came down to one person, my daughter Lily. She was 8 years old, endlessly curious, and somehow capable of making even the most difficult days feel worthwhile with a single smile. After months of searching for stable work, countless interviews, and more rejection emails than I cared to remember, I was finally walking toward Bennett Global for what felt like the opportunity that could change everything. The company stood above the Chicago skyline like a symbol of ambition itself. People spoke about working there the way athletes spoke about reaching a championship game. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blazer, took one steady breath, and stepped into the elegant lobby filled with polished marble floors, quiet conversations, and professionals moving confidently through the morning rush. The elevator doors opened just as I reached them. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the executive interview floor. Just before the doors closed, another woman hurried in carrying several folders and a reusable coffee cup. One folder slipped from the stack, and I instinctively reached out before it reached the floor. She looked at me with genuine appreciation instead of embarrassment. "Thank you," she said warmly. "You probably just saved my morning." I smiled. "I think we all need a little help before 9 o'clock. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that immediately put people at ease. She wore an elegant charcoal business suit, yet nothing about her attitude suggested superiority. She looked composed, confident, and remarkably present despite the busy morning around us. Her eyes briefly noticed the visitor badge clipped to my jacket. "Interview?" she asked. "Yes," I admitted. "The biggest one of my career." She nodded thoughtfully. "Preparation matters more than pretending to be fearless." That sentence stayed with me. We spent the rest of the elevator ride talking about ordinary things that somehow felt meaningful. Chicago traffic. The unpredictable weather near Lake Michigan. The comfort of a good cup of coffee before an important meeting. She listened carefully whenever I spoke, asking thoughtful questions instead of waiting for her turn to answer. When the elevator reached the executive floor, she stepped out first before turning back toward me with an encouraging smile. "Whatever happens today," she said, "do not let one interview decide your worth." Before I could thank her properly, she disappeared down the hallway. I assumed she was another executive on her way to an early meeting. I never imagined she was Charlotte Bennett, the Billionaire founder and chief executive officer whose name appeared on the building outside. My interview lasted nearly 90 minutes. We discussed marketing strategy, customer trust, brand development, and leadership philosophy. Every answer seemed to build naturally on the last, and for the first time in months I walked out of an interview feeling proud instead of uncertain. As I reached the sidewalk, my phone vibrated with a text message from Lily. It simply read, "Good luck, Mom. I know you can do it." I smiled, slipped my phone back into my pocket, and looked once more at the towering glass building behind me. I believed I had just taken the biggest step toward a brighter future. I had absolutely no idea that by the same time tomorrow, I would receive the opportunity one had always wanted, only to make a decision that would leave an entire company, and especially one remarkable woman, wondering why anyone would ever choose a different path. The following afternoon, while Lily and I were sitting at our small kitchen table finishing her math homework, my phone rang with a number I immediately recognized. It was Bennett Global. I answered with a calm voice even though my heart was beating much faster than I wanted to admit. The recruiter congratulated me warmly and explained that every member of the interview panel had been impressed with both my experience and my ideas. She officially offered me the position along with an excellent salary, comprehensive benefits, and opportunities for long-term career growth. Everything she described represented the future I had spent months trying to reach. When she asked whether I accepted the offer, I thanked her sincerely and requested one day to think about it. She agreed without hesitation. After ending the call, I sat quietly while Lily looked at me with bright, hopeful eyes. "Did you get the job?" she asked. I smiled and nodded. "They offered it to me." She immediately hugged me. I knew they would. I held her tightly, but instead of feeling only excitement, I felt an uncomfortable question growing inside me. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, I spread 2 employment offers across my dining room table. Bennett Global offered financial stability that would completely change our lives. The second offer came from a small marketing agency located only a few miles from Lily's elementary school. The salary was significantly lower, but the schedule ended before school dismissal almost every day, and the office culture emphasized work-life balance instead of constant availability. I stared at both offers for a long time before opening a notebook. At the top of one page I wrote a simple sentence. What kind of life am I trying to build? I listed every advantage Bennett Global could provide, then every reason the smaller agency seemed to fit the life Lily and I had slowly rebuilt together. One list promised greater income. The other promised more time. Neither choice felt easy. The following morning, I drove Lily to school as I always did. Before getting out of the car, she smiled and thanked me for never missing afternoon pickup. "Some of my friends stay at school until it gets dark," she said. "I like that you always come." She closed the door and skipped toward the entrance without realizing she had just answered the question I had been struggling with all night. I watched her disappear into the building before quietly wiping away a tear. Childhood only happens once. Careers offer second chances. That afternoon, I accepted the position at the smaller agency. Then I called Bennett Global. The recruiter sounded genuinely surprised when I politely declined the offer. She asked whether another company had offered a higher salary. "No," I answered honestly. "Actually, it pays much less." A brief silence followed before she gently asked, "May I ask why?" I looked through my apartment window toward the neighborhood playground where children laughed without worrying about deadlines or promotions. "Because the person waiting for me after school matters more than any job title," I replied. "I cannot earn back the afternoons I would lose." The recruiter thanked me for my honesty and wished me nothing but success. I believed our conversation had ended there. Across downtown Chicago, however, the unusual decision quickly reached the office of Charlotte Bennett. When she learned that the strongest candidate had chosen a lower-paying position simply to spend more time with her daughter, she did not react with frustration or disappointment. Instead, she quietly looked out across the Chicago skyline and asked Human Resources one unexpected question. "Would Grace Sullivan be willing to meet with me?" she said. "I do not want to convince her to change her mind. I want to understand what our company has failed to see." 3 days later, an email arrived that I almost deleted because I assumed it was another routine follow-up from Bennett Global. Instead, the sender was Charlotte Bennett herself. Her message was surprisingly brief and respectful. She thanked me for considering the company's offer, explained that she admired honest decisions even when they were difficult, and asked whether I would be willing to meet with her for coffee. She made one promise very clear. She was not inviting me to persuade me to change my mind. She simply wanted to understand my perspective. Curiosity eventually overcame hesitation, and I accepted. The meeting took place in a quiet conference lounge on the top floor of Bennett Global overlooking downtown Chicago. When the elevator doors opened, I immediately recognized the woman waiting near the windows. She smiled before I could say a word. "I was wondering how long it would take before you realized we had already met." I laughed softly as the memory returned all at once. "The elevator." She nodded. "I did not think it was fair to introduce myself as the chief executive before your interview. I wanted everyone to meet the same company." The honesty in her answer immediately put me at ease. Rather than sitting behind a large executive desk, Charlotte had chosen 2 comfortable chairs beside the windows with coffee already waiting. The setting felt less like a corporate meeting and more like a genuine conversation between 2 people. For several minutes we spoke about ordinary things. Chicago winters. Lily's love of science class. My first week at the smaller marketing agency. Charlotte listened with remarkable attention, never interrupting or rushing the conversation. Finally, she folded her hands together and asked the question that had brought us there. "Grace, I have interviewed many talented people throughout my career. You are the first person who declined our offer while accepting significantly less money somewhere else. What did we fail to understand?" I looked out across the skyline before answering. "You did not misunderstand my experience. You misunderstood my priorities." She remained completely silent, encouraging me to continue. The position offered everything I worked hard to earn. The salary was generous. The projects were exciting. The opportunity was extraordinary. But every version of that future required me to spend less time with my daughter during the years she still needs me most. I could always build another career opportunity later. I cannot ask childhood to wait. Charlotte lowered her eyes for a brief moment, and when she looked back at me, the confidence she always carried had softened into quiet reflection. "My parents built successful businesses," she said gently. "They loved me deeply, but they believed providing for me mattered more than being present. They missed birthdays, school concerts, and countless ordinary afternoons that I would gladly trade every business award to experience again." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. "Perhaps I built this company using the same definition of success they taught me," Charlotte admitted. "Meeting you has made me wonder whether I have been asking people to sacrifice too much." I smiled gently. "Sometimes people do not need higher salaries. Sometimes they simply need permission to be present for the people they love." Charlotte looked at me with quiet gratitude, and in that simple moment, I realized this conversation was no longer about a declined job offer. It had become the beginning of something much more meaningful, not only for the 2 of us, but perhaps for every person who walked through the doors of Bennett Global after us. Over the next several weeks, I rarely thought about our conversation until another email from Charlotte appeared in my inbox. This time, she was not inviting me to discuss a job I had already declined. Instead, she asked whether I would be willing to meet once more because she wanted my opinion on an idea that had been growing ever since we talked. When I arrived at Bennett Global again, I noticed something different. Instead of leading me directly to her office, Charlotte introduced me to the head of human resources and several members of her leadership team. They welcomed me warmly, but I could sense they were trying to understand why I had been invited. Charlotte began the meeting without slides or lengthy presentations. She simply looked around the room and said, "A few weeks ago, I met someone who reminded me that we measure commitment too narrowly. I think we have been rewarding time spent in the office instead of the value people create." The room became completely silent. She then explained the concept she had been developing. Rather than offering me the original position again, she wanted to create an entirely new leadership role built around flexibility, accountability, and measurable results instead of fixed office hours. Employees in similar positions would be evaluated by performance, collaboration, innovation, and client satisfaction rather than how late they stayed at their desks. The proposal challenged years of company tradition, and several executives exchanged uncertain glances. One senior manager politely questioned whether such a system would encourage inconsistency across departments. Charlotte listened respectfully before answering. Trust is not the opposite of accountability, she said calmly. If we hire exceptional people, then we should create conditions where they can succeed without forcing unnecessary sacrifices at home. She then turned toward me. Grace, I would like your honest opinion. Not as a candidate. As someone who chose differently. I hesitated because I did not want to influence decisions that affected an entire company. Finally, I spoke. Flexibility only works when expectations are clear, I said. People should be trusted, but they should also understand exactly what success looks like. When both exist together, families benefit and businesses benefit too. The discussion continued for more than an hour. Instead of defending old policies, the leadership team began asking practical questions about implementation, communication, and long-term evaluation. For the first time, I saw executives discussing parents, caregivers, and personal responsibilities with the same seriousness they normally reserved for quarterly reports. As the meeting concluded, Charlotte walked with me toward the elevator where we had first met. She smiled thoughtfully before speaking. There is one more thing. I looked at her curiously. I would like you to become the first person to hold this new position. I was genuinely speechless. Charlotte, I cannot accept special treatment. She immediately shook her head. This is not special treatment. If it only worked for you, it would not deserve to exist. This position will become the model for future leadership roles across Bennett Global. Someone has to prove that excellent leadership and a meaningful personal life can exist together. I believe you are the right person. As the elevator doors opened, I realized this decision was no longer about choosing between my career and my daughter. It was about helping build a workplace where no parent would ever have to make that impossible choice again, and for the first time since becoming a single mother, I allowed myself to imagine a future where success and family could finally walk side by side. Accepting Charlotte's proposal was both exciting and terrifying because I understood that I was no longer simply accepting a new job. I was agreeing to become the first real test of an idea that could reshape an entire company. My first morning at Bennett Global felt very different from the interview that had brought me there weeks earlier. This time I walked through the front entrance as an employee, carrying both confidence and responsibility. Several coworkers welcomed me warmly, while others observed quietly, unsure what to expect from someone whose position had never existed before. I understood their skepticism. New ideas often create uncertainty before they create progress. Charlotte greeted me with the same calm smile I remembered from the elevator. She never treated me like a special project or a personal success story. Instead, she introduced me exactly as she had promised. Grace is here because she earned her place, she told the leadership team. The new structure exists because we should never stop improving the way we lead. Those words immediately removed the invisible pressure I had been carrying. During my first few weeks, I focused on delivering results rather than explaining the philosophy behind my schedule. Every client meeting was carefully prepared. Every marketing strategy included measurable goals. Every deadline was met on time. I left the office early enough to pick up Lily from school, but after she finished her homework and went to bed, I occasionally reviewed reports from home when necessary. The difference was not that I worked less. The difference was that I controlled when and where the work happened without sacrificing quality. Before long, clients began complimenting our campaigns, and quarterly performance numbers exceeded expectations. Coworkers who had quietly questioned the new approach started asking practical questions instead of expressing doubt. One afternoon a project manager stopped by my office and admitted that he had missed several of his son's baseball games over the past 2 years because he believed staying late proved his commitment. Watching the way you work has made me realize that maybe I have been measuring success the wrong way, he said. His words stayed with me for the rest of the day because they reminded me that change rarely begins with policies. It begins when one person gives another permission to imagine something better. Charlotte and I also found ourselves spending more time together, not because she supervised my daily work, but because we genuinely enjoyed exchanging ideas. Sometimes we discussed leadership strategies over coffee. Other times we talked about books, community programs, or the importance of building trust before expecting loyalty. I noticed that Charlotte asked thoughtful questions far more often than she offered immediate answers. She had an unusual ability to make people feel heard, even when she challenged their opinions. One evening after most employees had already gone home, we stood near the conference room windows overlooking the Chicago skyline glowing beneath the setting sun. Charlotte quietly admitted, "For years I believed a successful company was built by asking people to give everything they had. Now I wonder whether the strongest companies are built by making sure people still have something left to give when they return home." I smiled because that simple sentence captured everything we had been working toward. At that moment I realized our partnership had quietly grown into something deeper than professional respect. It was built on shared values, honest conversations, and a belief that success meant very little unless it also made life better for the people who helped create it. As the months passed, the conversations between Charlotte and me gradually became less about marketing strategies and workplace innovation and more about the quiet parts of life that people rarely shared inside a corporate office. It happened naturally, usually after long meetings had ended and the building had grown peaceful. One evening we remained in the executive lounge overlooking the Chicago skyline while the city lights slowly appeared one by one. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. Charlotte poured 2 cups of coffee before looking out the window with an expression I had never seen before. She seemed thoughtful, almost vulnerable. After a long silence, she smiled gently and said, "Do you know something strange? Thousands of people know my name, but very few people actually know me." Her words surprised me because I had always assumed someone with her confidence never questioned her place in the world. I waited quietly, allowing her to continue. "People see the company, the interviews, the awards, and the headlines," she said. "They assume that means I have everything I could ever want. What they never see are the evenings when I return to an empty apartment after spending 12 hours solving everyone else's problems." She laughed softly, although there was sadness behind it. "Success can be surprisingly quiet when there is no one waiting to ask how your day really was." I understood that feeling more than she probably realized. After my marriage ended, I admitted, I stopped worrying about being alone. I worried about whether Lily would feel alone. Charlotte turned toward me with complete attention. I explained how becoming a single mother had forced me to rebuild my confidence one small step at a time. There had been mornings when paying every bill felt impossible, afternoons when I questioned every decision I made, and nights when I stayed awake wondering whether I was giving Lily the childhood she deserved. "Children notice everything," I said quietly. "Not because they listen to every word, but because they watch every choice we make." Charlotte nodded slowly. "My parents loved me," she replied. "I have never doubted that. But they believed love was measured by opportunity instead of presence. They gave me excellent schools, beautiful vacations, and every resource imaginable. The only thing they could never give back was time." We sat in comfortable silence, each reflecting on lives that had looked completely different yet somehow carried the same quiet loneliness. I realized that Charlotte had spent years surrounded by people who admired her achievements, while I had spent years focused entirely on protecting someone else's future. Neither of us had expected to find someone who truly understood those experiences. Over the following weeks, our friendship deepened through simple moments rather than dramatic events. Charlotte occasionally asked how Lily's school projects were going before discussing business. I found myself bringing an extra homemade cookie because I knew Charlotte often skipped lunch during busy days. She would smile every time, pretending to negotiate for a second one. Those small gestures slowly became part of our routine without either of us mentioning them. One Friday afternoon, as we finished another productive meeting, Charlotte looked at me with quiet sincerity and said, "You have changed the way I lead this company." I smiled before answering, "And you have changed the way I imagine my future." Neither of us spoke after that because some truths become more powerful when they are simply allowed to exist. As we walked together toward the elevator, I realized that what had begun as mutual respect had quietly grown into something warmer, something built on trust, kindness, and the rare comfort of finally being fully understood by another person. The true test of every belief arrives on an ordinary day when no one expects life to change, and ours came on a bright Thursday morning just before the most important client presentation Bennett Global had scheduled all year. Months of research, planning, and collaboration had led to this meeting, and I was responsible for leading the final presentation before a room filled with executives from one of our largest partners. By 8:30 that morning, every member of my team was prepared, every presentation slide had been reviewed, and every question had been anticipated. Charlotte wished me good luck before taking her seat near the back of the conference room. Just as I was organizing my notes, my phone vibrated quietly. I almost ignored it until I saw the name of Lily's school on the screen. My heart immediately sank. Her teacher explained that Lily had developed a high fever during class and was resting in the nurse's office. She was comfortable, but she needed to be picked up as soon as possible. I thanked the teacher, ended the call, and stood silently for a moment. Every instinct told me exactly where I needed to be, yet I also understood that dozens of people were counting on me inside the conference room. I walked directly to Charlotte and explained the situation. Before I could finish speaking, she simply asked, "Is Lily all right?" I nodded. "She will be. She just needs me." Charlotte smiled gently. "Then you already know where you belong." As I turned toward the door, one senior executive stood and objected. He spoke respectfully, but his concern was obvious. "With all due respect, this presentation cannot succeed without its lead strategist." Several people around the table quietly nodded. Charlotte remained completely calm. She looked around the room before answering with remarkable confidence. "If this presentation depends entirely on one person, then we have failed as leaders long before today." The room fell silent. She continued, "Grace prepared this team to succeed together, not to depend on her alone. More importantly, no company that claims to value people should ever ask a parent to choose between an important meeting and a child who needs them." No one argued after that. I thanked my team, handed my presentation notes to my deputy director, and left the building without guilt. For the first time in my professional life. When I arrived at Lily's school, she smiled weakly from the nurse's office the moment she saw me. "I knew you would come," she whispered as I hugged her gently. Those 5 simple words reminded me exactly why I had once declined the biggest opportunity of my career. Later that afternoon, after Lily was resting comfortably at home with medicine, water, and her favorite blanket, I checked my messages expecting to see questions or concerns from work. Instead, there was only one message from Charlotte. "Everything went well. Take care of what matters most today." The following morning, I returned to the office prepared to apologize for leaving so suddenly. Instead, my team greeted me with smiles and congratulations. The client presentation had been a complete success. Our preparation, trust, and collaboration had carried the meeting exactly as Charlotte believed they would. Even more surprising, employees throughout the building were quietly discussing what had happened, not because I had left the meeting, but because the chief executive had publicly demonstrated that compassion and strong leadership could exist together without compromise. In that single moment, Charlotte had done more than defend my decision. She had shown an entire company that the strongest leaders are not the ones who demand impossible sacrifices. They are the ones who make sure no one has to choose between doing exceptional work and being there for the people they love most. The weeks following the presentation marked the beginning of a quiet transformation that reached far beyond a single department. Employees who had once believed flexibility was merely an experiment began experiencing the results for themselves. Team leaders learned how to measure outcomes instead of office hours. Parents no longer felt uncomfortable requesting time for school events or medical appointments. Managers discovered that trust encouraged responsibility instead of reducing it. Quarter after quarter, productivity continued to improve, employee retention increased, and client satisfaction reached its highest level in company history. What surprised everyone most was that the company's culture became stronger at the very moment many people had predicted it would become weaker. Charlotte often reminded the leadership team that people performed at their best when they believed they were respected as human beings first and employees second. Watching those ideas become reality was more rewarding than I had ever imagined. One Saturday morning, Bennett Global organized a community volunteer event at a neighborhood park on the north side of Chicago. Employees and their families spent the day planting flowers, repainting playground benches, and assembling reading corners for local children. I brought Lily with me, hoping she would enjoy spending time outdoors while meeting some of the people I worked with every day. At first she stayed close beside me, holding my hand as she quietly observed the crowd. Charlotte arrived wearing jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a simple navy shirt instead of her usual business attire. She looked relaxed in a way I had never seen inside the office. When she noticed Lily examining a packet of flower seeds, she walked over with a warm smile and knelt beside her. "Do you think these will grow into something beautiful?" she asked. Lily studied the picture carefully before answering with complete confidence. "Only if someone remembers to take care of them." Charlotte laughed softly. "That might be the smartest gardening advice I have ever heard." Before long, the two of them were working side by side, carefully planting flowers while discussing favorite books, science experiments, and Lily's dream of becoming an environmental engineer one day. I stood a few feet away pretending to organize supplies, but the truth was that I simply enjoyed watching them together. Charlotte never tried to impress Lily. She listened to her with genuine curiosity, treating every question and every story as though it truly mattered. Lily responded naturally, smiling more with every passing minute. On the drive home that afternoon, Lily looked out the car window for a while before quietly asking, "Mom, is Charlotte always that nice?" I smiled because the question sounded so sincere. "Yes," I answered. "She really is." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I like people who make everyone else feel important." Her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep that evening. They perfectly described the quality I admired most about Charlotte. Over the following months, our friendship continued to deepen through ordinary moments that slowly became extraordinary because of their consistency. We celebrated successful projects together, encouraged one another during difficult weeks, and discovered that our happiest conversations rarely involved business at all. Somewhere along the way, without either of us planning it or even speaking about it directly, admiration quietly became affection, and affection gradually became something that felt remarkably like home. Neither of us rushed to define it because some relationships become strongest when they are allowed to grow with patience, kindness, and complete honesty. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of Bennett Global watching employees greet one another with an ease that had not existed when I first walked through those doors carrying nothing but hope and uncertainty. The company had recently been recognized as one of the best places to work in Chicago, not because of record profits alone, but because employees consistently described the culture with words like trust, respect, flexibility, and belonging. Those achievements mattered to everyone, yet I knew they had begun with something much smaller than any strategic plan. They had begun with one honest conversation between two women who believed success should never require people to leave the most important parts of themselves at the office door. My own life had changed in ways I never could have imagined. Professionally, our team continued delivering outstanding results while helping other departments adopt the same leadership philosophy. Personally, Lily was happier than I had seen her in years. She was thriving at school, growing more confident every day, and she often reminded me that the best evenings were the ordinary ones we spent together around our dinner table. Charlotte had quietly become part of those ordinary moments as well. She joined us for community events, school science fairs, and weekend walks along the Lake Michigan shoreline whenever our schedules allowed. She never tried to replace anyone in Lily's life. Instead, she earned Lily's trust the same way she had earned mine, through consistency, kindness, and genuine presence. One afternoon, after attending another leadership conference where Bennett Global received recognition for its people-first workplace culture, Charlotte and I found ourselves walking toward the very same elevator where we had first met more than a year earlier. As the doors closed, we exchanged amused smiles, both remembering that ordinary morning that had changed everything. Charlotte leaned lightly against the wall and looked at me with the same thoughtful expression she had worn during our very first conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," I answered. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had accepted the original offer the very first day?" I smiled before looking at our reflections in the polished elevator doors. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I think we would have become exactly what we expected to be. You would have been my chief executive, and I would have been another employee trying to impress you." Charlotte laughed softly. "Instead?" she asked. I turned toward her. "Instead, we challenged each other to become better people before becoming anything else." For a quiet moment neither of us spoke. Then Charlotte gently reached for my hand. It felt completely natural, as though every conversation, every difficult decision, and every act of kindness had been leading us to that simple gesture. The elevator doors opened, and before we could take another step, Lily came running across the lobby carrying a small notebook from her after-school science club. "You both have to see this," she said excitedly. Charlotte and I laughed as we followed her toward the lobby seating area, still walking side by side. Watching Lily enthusiastically explain her latest project, I realized that life rarely changes because of dramatic moments. More often, it changes because someone chooses compassion instead of convenience, understanding instead of assumption, and presence instead of endless ambition. Looking back, I never regretted declining the opportunity one thought I wanted because that single decision led me toward a future I could never have imagined. It brought me meaningful work, lasting purpose, a company willing to grow, a child surrounded by love, and a woman who taught me that the strongest relationships are built one quiet act of kindness at a time. In the end, the greatest success was never measured by promotions, awards, or titles. It was measured by the people who walked beside us when the elevator doors finally opened to a better life.